Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage podcast with Greg Gregory. Join us as Greg interviews powerful thought leaders and successful team and leadership experts from across the country on teamwork, leadership, and organizational culture. Now let's check in for this week's episode.
Welcome back to the Teamwork Advantage, a podcast that's dedicated to the growth, development, and advancement in three key areas: teamwork, leadership, and culture. Every week we bring you a new guest that's talking about focusing in on all three of those aspects, whether it be in business, in your personal lives, even with your kids' softball, baseball, basketball teams. All of these tools that we talk about can be used in multiple ways. It's up to you to extrapolate them, and that's what we're looking for. Today is no different. We're bringing a gentleman to us today from Nashville, Tennessee, Jeff Engle, and his background might surprise you a little bit. Of course, you all know that if you've listened to the podcast, we've had a lot of military folks on. Jeff's another one of our military folks, but how he got there and where he is today is key. Folks, one thing to remember, one of my great philosophies is if you're not growing, you're dying. And if we continue to do things we did 10 years ago, the way we did them 10 years ago, we're in trouble. And so Jeff's going to talk about that, especially with his new position that he's got today. We're excited that we've been downloaded in 79 countries and growing. So here we go, folks. Let's learn a little bit about Jeff Engle. And a little bit here, he's a special ops veteran. And he's currently the president of Conquest Cyber, a top cybersecurity firm. And folks, if you don't think cybersecurity is vital, wait till you hear some of the things he's going to be chatting about today. He applies his military strategy to business leadership and everyday life challenges, demonstrating how breaking established rules, and we're going to talk about breaking the rules because there's some rules that need to be broken from time to time, and conventions can create a competitive advantage. His new book, All the War They Want, is available now wherever books are sold, Amazon or wherever you happen to pick yours up. Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage, Jeff Engle.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Looking forward to it.
So I've read over your background. I've looked at your LinkedIn page and a couple of thoughts there, and I've read pieces of your book, and we need about a week to go over some of your background here to try and hit it. So I'm really excited, but I want to go back. You didn't wake up one day out of high school saying, I am going to be a cybersecurity president. Tell us about your story, what happened, because you've got a very interesting backstory.
Yeah, I definitely did not. In fact, some people would be surprised to know that I didn't even own a computer until I was 18, until after I was already in the Army. Never had a cell phone growing up. Yeah, barely went to the library and logged in when I was in high school. And it was, they were becoming more common, but I didn't have some of the financial advantages to be able to take the opportunity to get more ingrained in technology. So, in fact, when I went through selection, and to be in one of my selection processes to be in the special missions unit, they asked me what my biggest regret was, and I said it was not learning more about technology. So fast forward now to having spent the last 4 years building my company and Conquest and our software. And even my previous job where I was building global infectious disease surveillance software, seeing me leading a technology firm is, it's a far cry from where it was. No, I woke up one day back when I was, 7, 8 years old, and I looked at, and I'm an observant guy. I looked at who in my life I wanted to emulate, who I thought set an example for me to follow. And then, learn from those who didn't, as well as those who did. My grandfather, he was an Army veteran, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and he did things his own way. Right? He had 9 Purple Hearts. He was wounded many times. He had spent a lot of time in combat, and he had the best sense of humor of any person I've ever met in my life, even to this day. So he had all of those experiences, but he still built an incredible life for his family, and he went as far as to buck the status quo as he gave every one of his grandchildren a different name, and he refused to call them by the name that his children gave them. So I'm not going to tell you what name he gave me, but I'll tell you that it was a lot more common in the 1940s and 50s than it is today. So I'm glad I'm sticking with Jeff. So he ended up passing, and I knew I was going to join the military. I ended up doing it at 17. I had a whole plan. I was going to go into the military, finish the education process, knock out an associate's degree, go to warrant officer candidate school, and become a helicopter pilot, and then eventually, get into special forces and then get into the special missions unit. So I had this whole idea, a whole plan around how I was going to proceed in life. It was completely nonsense. Like it can't even be done in that way. But I didn't have enough information to be able to deter me. So I got into training, and September 11th happens when I was in the second day of the reconnaissance course for weapons of mass destruction. So
wait a minute, you joined, what year was it when you joined?
Yeah, it was April 2001.
Okay.
So September 11th, I was in the advanced specialty course for cyber reconnaissance, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear reconnaissance. So, needless to say, they walk into the classroom, they say, "Hey, we're at war. Be prepared. You're gonna end up going." And I did. I spent, I got finished with that training, and I went to my first duty station, and I got deployed. I came back from that deployment 3 days before Christmas, and they walked onto the bus and said, "Don't unpack your bags. You're going right back." So, I spent the next couple of weeks getting vehicles ready, and then we went back and deployed and then invaded Iraq. So I came back from that trip and I transferred duty stations and immediately deployed again. So by the time I was, 4 years into the Army, I had over 2 years in combat. I'd been promoted to sergeant, and I was on my way to staff sergeant. And I got an email out of the blue, said, "Hey, do you want to do something different?" At that point, I had a commendation for valor and a Purple Heart, and I'd been distinguished honor grad, a bunch of courses. So I said, absolutely, and ended up finishing that deployment and coming back from it 3 weeks later. I was in a selection process, and I ended up being the youngest person ever hired into one of so America's most elite counterterrorism organization. So I got to learn from the best in the world, and it's not a hyperbole to say that, the best in the world at executing no-fail missions. So after I got hurt, ended up doing some assessments on the DoD Red Team and Mission Assurance Vulnerability Assessment Team. That's where I kind of got broken in more into technology, essentially figure out how to break it so we can protect it. And I left the military, jumped around jobs, realized that there was one thing that was a common thread, that I had a passion for what I thought was the greatest threat to national security. So I started with weapons of mass destruction, and then counterterrorism, then global infectious disease, which, now that we've been in COVID for 3 years, other people probably understand. And now cyber. I think that's the way that people are going to reach out and touch us, even without most sophisticated military technology. So it is the great, in my opinion, and has been for many years now, the greatest threat to our national security. So that's why I built a company to try and solve that complex problem. So it definitely was not an overnight thing.
Oh no, definitely not overnight.
Many years.
And I want to stress the fact that you joined the military. You had to get a waiver, an age waiver, because you were not 18 years of age when that all happened. And that was.
I had an age waiver to come in, and I got an age waiver to go into special operations. I was below the minimum age then as well.
Mm-hmm. So my father used to use the term the stick-to-itiveness, having that ability to stick to certain things to be able to do and have that in vision was critical for you in your career lines. As I look at that, sticking to a pattern and a route and a plan, what was it? Was there something in particular that talked about in your life that tripped something that allowed you to realize, hey, it's okay to break some rules. Breaking the rules, sometimes that can be your best option. I get that. How did you know it?
I think there was a seminal moment. It was about a 7-hour period in April of 2004 that cemented in my mind and allowed me to better explain the necessity in breaking some established rules. I mean, I've always been a little bit of a anti-authoritarian personality. I was the one who told teachers they were wrong, and and people thought I was going to be terrible with the military because their perception of people who haven't been in, it's you're just supposed to do what you're told, and respect all people in positions of authority. And I never really did. It was I respect people based on what they do and the alignment between what they say and what they do, not necessarily what rank they have. So that 7-hour period, it was essentially I saw everything go wrong that could possibly go wrong. It was the night I was wounded, and we should not have been out that night. There was intelligence that there were and a stop movement order across Baghdad that evening for anything less than a Bradley fighting vehicle. And at that point, there were no up armored Humvees, or very few of them. We had modified some tracked vehicles and got some scrap metal and welded it on the doors of the Humvees. So we go out, and as soon as we leave the gate, the communications fails. So I was the assistant patrol leader, but I was the only one who could communicate to our higher headquarters. We ended up getting up on the operating post. So the observation post where we could see the route that we were supposed to be monitoring. And some Bradleys and tanks went past us, and got hit by IEDs and RPGs. So eventually the call was made for us to go back. We couldn't take that route, so we took an alternate. As soon as we got on that route, all the lights were cut off, and I got hit with a blast. I'm not sure if it was an IED or an RPG, but an RPG skipped in front of our platoon leader's vehicle, and we started to get engaged with machine gun fire. So I tried to engage an enemy, and I shot one round, and then the weapon jammed. I was on a 50 cal machine gun on the top of the vehicle, exposed, and at that point, I could only see out of one eye. My jaw was fractured, and I had shrapnel in my eye. So I told everybody to stop. And the rule there is you speed through the ambush. But we had just gotten onto the route, so I told everybody to stop, and I was fixing the jam and told them to turn around and go back the other way. So as they passed me, I got started to re-engage, and I had small arms that I was dealing with, and then we eventually got back to the green zone. I spent the night in the hospital as they took the shrapnel out of my eye. But basically, communication failed, right? And it failed from an intelligence communication standpoint, which is why we were out there. The reason our radios weren't working as designed is because they didn't do the maintenance that they needed to. So you actually have to clean the antennas on those types of vehicles, especially as you drive 14 hours through the desert. They misconfigured my 50 cal. So there's this thing called headspace and timing. You have to properly put the barrel on, or else it won't allow the rounds to feed. So all of these things were happening, and everybody deals with these on a regular basis. Failure to communicate, failure to do proper maintenance, misconfiguring things. All of that led to us being in a scenario that if I would have followed the rules, that just keep pushing through the ambush, the rest of that route, we later found out, because we were doing EOD, explosive ordnance disposal support, the rest of the route was daisy chained with IEDs. So odds are we would have all died, or a good chunk of us, if we would have continued down that route. So it broke the rule. Then it saved my life without a doubt. But it was because of everything else that was going on. I had all of the context, for
you were able to put it all into the proper perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that point, I was 19 years old. I was a 19-year-old sergeant, put in this scenario, and just probably had a concussion. Definitely had shrapnel in my eye and a fractured jaw. And my platoon was, most of the people didn't even know what was going on because they were all huddled inside of, the back of those tracked vehicles.
Right.
But that just, that split decision making and not just doing what I was told, may have been the game changer there.
So let's be clear though. You broke those rules because you had greater knowledge about a lot of different things. You're not advocating that people just go break rules willy-nilly.
No, not at all. A lot of those rules are established for good reason. It's so people know what to do when they don't actually know why they're doing it.
Right.
That's that's why I advocate for breaking rules, because in order to effectively break them, you have to understand the why that those rules were created. I have some examples, and they're like, these are hardcore, never break these rules types of example, like leaders eat last. Right? I think there's even a book around that. It's a common thing in the military. The real impetus behind leaders eat last is you should never put your soldiers or your people in a position that they're having to suffer for your inability to properly resource them. But if you have good logistics, if you think through the actual requirements, it doesn't matter whether you eat first, you eat last, you eat in the middle. The bottom line is everybody's going to get fed. They're going to get what they need in order to be able to accomplish the mission. So just leaders eat last as a common saying or an approach. It only makes sense if it's a cop out to be able to effectively plan the logistics that are needed in order to be able to execute the full mission. And I think people fall back on rules too much, and they never seek to understand what it is that made that an established rule.
Yeah. Now you go back to Dr. Stephen Covey back in the 80s. One of the rules is seek first to understand, then be understood. You understand why the rule is in place, then once you understand that, then you can proactively think about, okay, is this rule something I need to break? And prior to us getting on the podcast here, we were chatting about the discipline that the military puts there and how businesses get so entrenched in doing the routine things that it allows for creativity. And I think that's kind of what you're discussing there. Am I on the same page?
Absolutely. I mean, businesses are probably and I'll say this as now having been an executive and in the C-suite chair now for 7-8 years. People doing what they're perceived they're supposed to do, what policy says, that thing, and just doing it blindly is probably the principal reason that most businesses end up failing within the first 5 years. Nobody actually seeks to understand the why. And it ends up being, my leaders or whoever, they told me to, and they must be all-knowing, all-seeing, all-hearing, right? And that's just not true. I mean, there's nobody that's in my chair that has the perspective of every person in the organization all of the time. Most of them don't even try to achieve that. So you need people who are going to ask, they're going to do it, but they're always going to be asking why. I would take somebody who, asks why and says we should do this differently and continues performing what's needed while they fix it, over somebody who's just going to beat their head against the wall and keep doing it because somebody told them to, 100 times out of 100.
Right. Yeah, that goes back to the different types of followerships that there are that all tie into all of that. Let's chat a little bit about, what you got. You were recruited to be in this special forces group, this special operations group, this special group that you were pulled into. You were recruited. What did that recruitment teach you about, I don't know, the grit? What did it teach you about how to push forward through? Because you were already successful and you had thought about this, but now you were actually recruited. You didn't necessarily go in looking for it at that point.
Yeah, I had a whole plan that got derailed by me jumping to the end. Almost like, there was a cheat code that said, hey, this is where I wanted to go, and here's what I think I need to do in order to get there. And then, I jump in like Mario Brothers, I jump into a tube, and now I'm at the end. And it was a surreal experience because I did not feel like I had any business being there. Okay. Almost like every day I needed to show up and earn it. And, unfortunately, it wasn't just that I got teleported to the end to where I ultimately wanted to be. Shortly after I got there, my team leader, he was deployed while I was going through training, and he got hit by an IED and was paralyzed. So I didn't just go from, the regular conventional Army where I was driving up and down roads, waiting to get hit by IEDs. I went from the regular Army where I was doing that to, a special missions unit, to being a team leader in that special missions unit, which is a position that's typically 35 to 40 years old, not 22. And, generally speaking, 15 years in the military, not 4. So that jump, and then being the next person up, I think it made me who I am. I consider those my formative years. I also, feel like I would love to have a do-over. Now that I'm actually, today I'm closer to, the age and experience of my peers, from now 15, 20 years ago. So it was a surreal process.
So let me ask you a question if I can.
Me to do.
Let me just jump in for a second here. I don't mean to interrupt, but fascinating that you were 22 years old, you'd only been in the Army for 4 years, and you're being tasked to go into something else in a more leadership role. I am assuming at that point there were several people that had more seniority, both military and definitely in the age range. How were you able to gain their trust, respect, and build the team?
Yeah, it's funny. I've literally my entire career, from the time I was a 19-year-old sergeant until now. Well, now it might have shifted a little bit, but the majority of my teams have always been older than me and had more time. And I'll tell you, the earning and keeping their respect sometimes is it's more about showing. It's more about the Michael Jordan that we talked about, right? Showing up before practice, staying longer after practice, setting an example. And a lot of people don't like it. They don't like that accountability that Jordan brought to the Bulls. And I'm not saying I'm Michael Jordan, but there's only one way to do that. You have to perform.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have the answers. You have to be able to help them move forward, get better. And I'm fortunate that, in my time in special operations, everybody there feels like they have to earn it every day. There's the sense of entitlement that you get in other places where, it's I'm older, I should be in charge, or I've, been doing this longer, that is typically dealt with throughout the selection process, but it's not tolerated once you're there. At the same time, selection is an ongoing process. So if ever I didn't show up and perform, everybody knew there was cultural accountability there, that their job was to make me successful. My job was to make them successful. And if anybody didn't do their job, they were going to be gone and somebody would replace them. So I think that healthy fear or inferiority complex, to a degree, even in the most elite organizations in the world, was a massive difference maker. And anywhere else you go where people get a sense of superiority or a sense of entitlement, I mean, that to me is the death knell to a team. If you feel like you deserve anything, it's already too late.
So the key word is, if you feel like you deserve it, it's too late. If you feel like you've earned it, that's a little different. So, but you said a key word there that I don't think we've actually talked about on our podcast yet, and that was cultural accountability. We've talked about accountability, we've talked about mutual accountability, but not cultural accountability. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I put it into three different categories. They're the people who just show up every day. They wake up, they go for their 10-mile run. They have drivers, whether they grew up and that was the expectation, or they have something like religion or something else that drives them, says I'm accountable to myself, to my performance. So that personal accountability is not something that scales, because everybody has different experiences, they come from different walks of life. And then there's the hierarchical accountability. There's the leader's going to say, if you don't do this, then here's going to be the consequence. And that ends up getting dulled with time. Just like if you're constantly screaming at your kids, they become immune to that screaming, right? And as soon as you don't follow through once, they know they got you.
Yeah,
So
that empty
both
threat
personal
thing.
and hierarchical accountability fail.
Yep.
Cultural accountability is literally everybody else that's around you all of the time are holding each other accountable to whatever the standard is. And if the standard is clear, everybody knows when somebody's not holding it up. So when I talk to my team, it's always about how do we foster more cultural accountability? How do we make it to where I don't have to be the one that points out that error? And people don't feel like an error or an omission is a death sentence. And I feel like hierarchical accountability kind of forces that a bit. Everybody's looking to not be the one that gets stuck with a hot potato, rather than, hey, we've all got to carry this thing to the end. Everybody take their turn and we pass it off. That way we avoid individually getting burned. So cultural accountability is something that we had in special operations. And it ends up tying together where hierarchical accountability isn't really needed, because it's self-policing. And the way my troop sergeant major framed it, he said, would you rather soar like an eagle because you're surrounded by other eagles, or soar like an eagle because you're surrounded by turkeys? Because if you don't have that, all you have to do is just fly just high enough to be above everyone else. But when you get into an elite organization with cultural accountability, you're constantly pushing the height of the team, and you're never going to be falling. You're never going to be kind of diving down and bringing everybody down to the level of those turkeys.
You're constantly lifting each other up. So
Absolutely.
How do you bring somebody along? Let's look in business, because in the military it's one way, but in business, what do you teach leaders to do? How do you work with leaders to really create that cultural accountability into an organization where people, like, maybe they're in level one, maybe they drive to do what they do, or maybe they're just like, I'm waiting to be told what to do, I am the robot, time to make the donuts type thing?
Yeah, so first is you got to model it. You have to model the behavior.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you said bottle it. You said model it. Okay.
Yeah, I wish I could bottle it. That'd be a game-changing business. No, you have to model the behavior. I tell people all the time, running a business is much like raising children. You can tell them anything that you want, but ultimately they become just like you because they're watching. And the example that you're setting is far more influential than the things that you say. So when I'm talking to my leaders, I'm talking about how to model the right behaviors. And if there's a problem with you modeling those behaviors, let's understand what the driver is behind that. Because if I can't fix it, then you shouldn't be a leader in the organization that we're in. So that's the most critical element. And then you have to be the kind of person that doesn't follow the traditional business rules, because you have to be a good judge of talents. For example, with what they did with me, I was a 21-year-old sergeant that they had massive analytics to identify of all of these people in the military who they wanted to bring in, and still how they did that is unknown to me. But I've done that personally, where I've identified some people who had the right ingredients. I've had many of my leaders today, I either worked for them at one point, they like in my team, I've either worked for them at one point or that I pulled them from a different world, whether they were, an intern in college or they were doing a different function in another company. And I looked for mission alignment. So could they actually embrace the mission that we have as an organization and then demonstrate the right behaviors? And if they did, I pulled them up very rapidly. There are people in my company that have gone from, in the time I've known them, 6 or 7 years, have gone from interns to executives. At the same time, there are people who just love being a machine gunner, right? They're an engineer. They just want to be an engineer. And
that's okay too.
We just need to enable them. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's encouraged. Like, leadership is not, it's not necessarily the only route to success.
Right.
Leadership is also not something that's really positional, right? Those engineers who are staying engineers, they're exhibiting and modeling the right behaviors for the team, for people who ultimately may end up being their boss. But definitely for team members who come in and are saying, this is the kind of behaviors I want to emulate. I want to take a piece of this, and I want to take a piece of this, and that's who ultimately I want to become.
Okay.
But modeling those behaviors and then treating selection as an ongoing process and not following any of those rules around years of experience or certifications or any of that. Really, it's attitude. Skills can all be taught. And with what we do, it's a mindset, more than it is anything else.
What would you say to someone today, someone who's in anywhere from their mid to late 20s up to their mid 30s, who's looking to move up and become a better leader? Maybe they're a team lead in their organization today. Maybe they're just getting into the possibility of thinking about leadership. What is something you would tell them to do today that would help enhance that for them?
I would tell them, find something that's worth fighting and winning for. Here's the problem that I see most of the time. People say they want the next level because they think that next level comes with people listening to them more or more money or that type of thing. Leadership is not about that. It's about impact. If you don't have something that you care about more than anybody else, that you just want to make more of an impact with, then you're actually doing a disservice to your team by being the one that they're looking to. Because if you don't model the behavior of embracing the mission and finding ways to solve those complex problems and have an outsized impact, then you're not really looking to be a leader. You're looking for higher levels of management. And you manage things, not people. You lead people. And if you're leading people and you don't believe in what you're doing, then don't do it. Right? Yeah. You're really hurting everybody by
you're hurting yourself and the team.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't figure out your why and wake up every morning and want to do it, you can't. If you think about leadership as a job rather than being part of your life, then it's already too late. I think there's a fundamental error in your decision-making process that ultimately is gonna hurt you and the rest of the team.
Okay, let's look at that other side of that coin now. Let's assume that you're in your senior-ish or a middle management position, regardless of your age at this point. You're in that position, and you are now looking for that next leader. Okay, you've been modeling the behavior, you're watching for people that may be modeling some of that behavior. What are you trying to secretly look for, if you will? And I hate to use that word secretly, but what are you looking for?
Their reaction to failure. It's that I give them opportunities to fail. And most people are like, oh, you want to give people opportunities to succeed. Like, success is easy, right? Everybody hoists the trophy and is happy. But how do they react when they don't know what they're supposed to do, when they fail their team? Because ultimately, in order to be successful, you have to be willing and open to trying things that you aren't good at, that you don't know how to do. You have to provide guidance to people when you don't know how to do it yourself. And if you can't effectively fail, right? If you can't take that failure and turn it into positive growth, you can't give people space to feel like they can make mistakes, then you really shouldn't be leading. Otherwise, what are we leading towards if we're not solving problems? Solving problems inevitably requires you to try things that don't work. So I give people opportunities to fail.
Like Thomas Edison said. Thomas Edison said, "I never found a way the light bulb didn't work. I just found I never failed at inventing the light bulb. I only found 700 and some odd ways it didn't work."
Absolutely. And this is where so I think scientists actually have a lot of value that they can provide to people within the corporate world in their mentality around failure. And I worked with scientists a lot, and I would say that some of them are very, very good people. Some of them are very, very annoying people. But ultimately, when you talk to a scientist and you say you were wrong, they never accept that they were wrong. All they'll accept was we made the analysis based on the data. We structured an effective test. We evaluated the results of that test. The results, whether they were negative or aligned with the hypothesis, both created value for the scientific community. Get it published so everybody else knows, here's how we did the evaluation, here's what the results were, here's what we expected to happen, here's what actually happened, and here are our findings. And it gets peer reviewed, and then it becomes part of the knowledge that we all can access now.
Yep.
That's
Because part
the
of the
way
knowledge
that
that we share becomes part of our knowledge base. And the more we build our knowledge base, the stronger our knowledge base gets, the stronger the team gets, and we lift the whole team.
Absolutely. So now, giving people opportunities to fail, as an example. There's all these lists of like 10 things that don't require any talent, right? They don't require any skill. It's just, showing up on time, doing what you say you're going to do, right? All of those kind of basics. That's where people, if you having a project that you didn't know how to do, and I knew they didn't know how to do it, and it doesn't work out, as designed, it becomes knowledge. It's valuable. Not showing up to meetings on time, not being present when you're there, not hitting deadlines that you agreed to, accepted, not communicating because you're uncomfortable with the fact that what you're communicating may not be positively received. That's where people ultimately fail. And that, I think, is way more common practice, in corporate America than we would want. And then blaming other people, for whatever the reason was. That's where people, when they're given an opportunity to fail, if they come back to me and say it didn't work out, but here are all the reasons why it's somebody else's fault, that to me is a good sign that they probably should not be in areas where they have more leaders that they're trying to build.
So what is Conquest Cyber into today, and that you can talk about, and where you're struggling with your teams and the challenges with your people today?
Sure. So we protect critical infrastructure. That's what we do. So everything from healthcare systems to financial services, the way we frame it is the sectors that are critical to our way of life. Our job is to help make them more resilient. And because what we do is out of the norm, right? Most cybersecurity companies or information security, they're trying to meet a compliance requirements, or they're just doing some sort of monitoring. We're actually getting in there and saying, we know you're going to get attacked by the most sophisticated nation state level adversaries. And when they're focused on you, they're going to get in. So we need to focus on resilience, not, preventing what we can predict and then adapting to everything else. So where I struggle is where we all struggle is in our DNA is change. It's adaptation to the changing operational environment. And people don't like to read work or change. It's a general rule I say. It's like, people want comfort, credibility, or clarity, and then somebody else to blame when things go wrong. So we've turned that on its head, and like, the DNA that's required in order to do this. You have to be willing to read, work, and change, and you have to be able to do it without clarity, without comfort, without credit in most cases, and with nobody else to blame when something goes wrong. So having a recruitment and selection process that continues to feed that.
We've lost your voice.
Is not for the faint of heart, okay. I would say,
right.
because
you
it requires you to do
you want to back up just a little bit? We lost a little bit of your audio there.
Sure. So being in an organization like ours with this mission that's, dealing with the most sophisticated adversaries requires an elite team, and that elite performance on waking up every day and not having the ability to have that selection process like you would have in, special operations, bringing that into corporate culture is definitely not for the faint of heart.
Okay. And that's the tough part with organizations, getting them to scale in the right direction, being able to be, in essence, be fluid with what's happening, because you are definitely in a very fluid business. There's no doubt. So let's talk a little bit about your book. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's fluid, and it's 24/7, 365. I mean, so there's no way to, we can't even have a meeting where everybody in the company is at that meeting, right? So fostering the culture and enabling cultural accountability all of the time is something that we are constantly fighting for.
Okay, and that's trying to keep that accountability. And again, I really love the term cultural accountability. It ties right into exactly what the TLC Advantage is all about with our teamwork programs. Tell us a little bit about your book. I mean, the title is All the War They Want. Now, you're not talking about in the military. You're not talking about all the challenges we're facing worldwide. What are you talking about? Tell us a little quick synopsis about the book.
Sure. It's simply a structured approach to solving the world's most complex problems. It's informed by my experiences in the military and jiu-jitsu and generally fighting in an upbringing to not accept the status quo as a life sentence. So I use a bit of cyber in our focus in part one, and then talk about how to effectively identify other key plank holders and then structure it to where people from all different walks of life and experiences can understand and embrace the core mission, and then what the role of the leader is and all of that to build and enable the team, resist the urge to manage, and ultimately to foster cultural accountability. So it's a formula to find something worth fighting for in your own mind, whether it be my mission or something else. But have enough passion to be able to apply this approach.
It's going to work for both leaders as well as followers in an organization. It's designed for anybody. It's not just designed for CEOs.
Absolutely. It's designed, whether you have a cause that you care about, a family you want to fight for, a sports team that you're on, it doesn't really matter. But if you're going to fight, you should win, right? You should be fighting to win. Otherwise, it's not worth, getting into the fight at all.
Okay. As I said when we started off, Jeff, we could go on for a long time about this. We never really got into the cybersecurity aspect of things. If there's one thing that you could tell folks today about protecting themselves from cyber attacks, whether it's individuals, their phones, their PCs, their tablets, or an organization, what's one thing that you would tell people from a cyber protection thing they need to do?
One thing is hard when there's a lot of things that you need to do. Mm-hmm. Multi-factor authentication, passwords, monitoring. You should be monitoring everything. Eliminate all the stuff that you don't need. Don't have 57 credit cards if you don't need them, which you don't. Eliminate all the things you don't need. Simplify what you do, and automate everything you can to where you have transparency, because it's only a matter of time. You probably are already compromised. I say that it's true for most of the listeners, they're already compromised. So how bad do you want that to be is up to you.
Okay. Cybersecurity, military, cultural accountability, it all came out in today's session. Jeff, if folks need to reach out to you, what's a good way that they might find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. It's the long form fancy version of my name, Jeffrey J. Engle. I'm on Twitter, Jeff_Conquest. And we'll pass along the rest of the contact info if anybody wants to reach out.
Okay.
I'm always happy to connect and engage.
And we're going to put it out there when we post everything about our stuff. We'll post your social media contacts out there as well. I'm excited to learn more. I'm excited to watch what Conquest does. Teamwork at every level is critical. And the thing we hit on today, again, I'm going back to it, is cultural accountability. Folks, the Teamwork Advantage is one of those podcasts where you can actually get information that you can start to implement immediately. I wrote down several notes here today. I'm going to go back and write down some more notes. Teamwork Advantage is designed so that you can walk out with something you can implement tomorrow. And Jeff gave us some of that. Remember, the Teamwork Advantage focuses in on teamwork, leadership, and culture. And when you listen to this podcast, you're not average, because having a good day is just being average. When you listen to this, you're not average. So go make today an excellent and exceptional day. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Teamwork Advantage with Greg Gregory. Be sure to like, subscribe, and activate the bell icon to be notified of future episodes. To learn more about how Greg can help your organization develop a powerful winning culture, visit TeamsRock.com. That's TeamsRock.com.